Hello and welcome to the Wednesday night Grumpy Sound Guy show. I am your host, Mr. J.R. Everhart, the Grumpster himself from CLP Audio and Staging here out of the metropolis of Inwood, West Virginia. We work the middle Atlantic, the mid-Atlantic here. DC, Baltimore scene is really our backyard and kind of where we make our living at. Tonight we're going to talk about and dive into some mixing station stuff. We're going to get up close with the camera and also talk about that scene is actually on a from a XR18 Behringer mixer. I don't work on those little mixers that much, so bear with me as we go through some of this. But we're going to talk about building a mix. I'm going to have some conversation about the X-Air as well. And we're going to have a little bit of conversation about Mixing Station. Now, there's tons and tons of resources on YouTube and across the internet about Mixing Station. It is definitely the magician's hat, and there's a lot of rabbits you can pull out of that hat. And, it's just a lot of fun to work with and customize. I'm not going to dive into all that stuff today. This isn't a Mixing Station how-to video, nor is it a how-to video on how to make your X-Air sound like a Pro X Midas or something, because it's not. But what we are going to do is we're going to go through the basic fundamentals of EQing, some compression stuff, gain structure, those sort of things that I use whenever I'm on an X-Air with the Mixing Station app. So make sure you stick around for all that. I'm going to take this moment to remind you, please subscribe to the channel. The channel's on fire right now. Thank you for your support. We probably gained over 500 subscribers just in the last 7 to 10 days. That goes out to you guys, man. Finally, I think YouTube is putting my content in front of the people who want to see this sort of content. But if you support this content and you like what we're doing here at the Grumpy Sound Guy YouTube channel, then be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell. And I am very proactive with the people who comment. I don't get to all of them because it's a lot, dude, really. It's a lot. But I try to at least acknowledge them. I try to read them all. And I try to give you guys advice. Tons and tons of guys are asking a bunch of questions. We're going to make videos about all those things moving forward. So make sure you stick around. Today's video, today's video is actually from a follower's question who had asked me to talk a little bit about the X-Air and to talk about, what the world is like inside that mixer. So all the business stuff aside, let's dive right in. So the X-Air is kind of like the little brother or the little sister to the X32. It doesn't really, I only say that because they both have a Behringer, badge on them. But they don't really have much else in common. Maybe the preamps are the same. Maybe, I don't know. They have about the same kind of build quality. I will say that. I think the X-Air series is built just as good as the X32 series stuff. So you're getting some quality across the different models there from that brand, but it's a scaled down version, so you don't get all the buzzers and whistles that you get with the X32. But as we talk about on this channel a lot of times, it's about keeping it simple, man, and it's about doing what works and just putting really good fundamental mixing practices in place. And we're going to go over that here in just a minute on the Mixing Station app. But it's not a bad console for the money. It's a little mixer that will get the job done. The router in it is complete trash. If you're standing over top of it, say you're like just a singer-songwriter and you're using an X-Air, 12 or 16. I don't know what the other sizes are. I'm really not that versed in it because I don't work on them little mixers very often. But if you got it right there at your feet or right next to you, the router will probably work okay. It works on 2.4 gigahertz, which is the same thing that your phone and your iPad and the club's Wi-Fi and everybody is surfing on, so you get a lot of interference there. And I've heard guys that are scanning new channels every time they go to a venue. That's a whole bunch of hoops to jump through to get the thing to work. I always just tell guys, if you're going to use like an X-Air 18 which is just big enough to do like a 4-piece Rock Band through, buy an external router, buy like a Netgear Nighthawk or a TP-Link, what is it, AC 18 or 1900, I think is what I use. I even use a point of access, but I'm usually getting further away from the mixer than what you are. So there's one downside to it. I do know guys that have had issues with hardware. They've lost channels due to failures in the hardware themselves, the connectors, cold solder joints. I had an Xair here at my shop for probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, maybe close to 6 months one time. The network connector all went bad in the thing, so you couldn't use it with the onboard router, nor could you connect an external router because of that connector. And I searched and searched and searched for months trying to get that part, and it was just not available. We ended up throwing the thing in a dumpster. You know, the client was not super thrilled about that, but I think they got the thing for a song used, so I don't think they had a whole bunch of money in it. But at the same time, these are the things you got to deal with, specifically with Behringer and even some of the Midas stuff. They just don't have very good support. They're disposable mixers, man. I mean, the X32 is a disposable mixer. All the Xair stuff is disposable mixers. Those are mixers that you're going to use for, 3 to 10 years. If you're lucky, if you get 10 years out of an Xair, you're really doing something. It might be in a install and never gets plugged and unplugged all the time. Maybe it was installed, plugged up, and then that's where it lived its entire life. Maybe you can get 10 years out of that. I don't know anybody I don't know anybody who has one that they've had one more than 5 or 7 years, Really just depends on how much you use it, how much it gets beat up in a rack and all that kind of stuff. But it's a disposable mixer, man, so you always hear me talk about adjusting your expectations and keeping it real, and you just got to. What do you expect for $300 or $400, man? I mean, it's not going to be an M32. It's not going to be a Pro 2, Midas or any other variety of mixers. But in that price range, it's about as good as anything else in that price range. I tend to push my clients, if they're looking for a small compact mixer like that, toward the Soundcraft UI stuff. Now, Soundcraft had some issues with the first gen of that stuff, but they've kind of got all that stuff mowed out now. I haven't heard of anybody who has any issues. I'll actually be mixing on a UI Friday night this week. I have a walk-in gig down in Westminster, Maryland for a band who's been using a UI 24 for, dude, I don't even know, man, 5-6 years or something. They got a lot of gigs on that thing, and it's showing no signs of failure or wear or anything like that. Now, it's got its own quirks, and I can do a video about the UI another time, but it's a pretty good mixer. The effects in the UI are amazing. At least the reverbs are. The reverb, the chorus, the flange is decent. The delay is okay as long as you don't want to change the tap, because it has tap delay built into it, but I can never get it to do what I want it to do, no matter what I do to get it there. Now, I know the Allen and Heath, the new CQ series or whatever. I haven't had my hands on one of those yet, so I can't speak to that. And I think that's a little bit more money maybe than the UI anyways. And we're really talking about budget mixers in this video, so I'm not going to include that in the conversation. The QSC Touch Mix is in this price range for the most part. I'm not a fan of the Touch Mix. There's nothing wrong with the Touch Mix. I just don't like the workflow. It's like some of the lower end Mackie DL mixers. I don't really like the workflow. I don't like the way they're laid out. I don't like the way the routing is in them, the way they configure the stuff in the app. It just, of course, I haven't tried either one of those with the Mixing Station app, so that may change my whole feel about it. It has nothing to do with durability or how they sound, because look, all these $500, I'm just going to call them $500 mixers or whatever. All these $500 mixers sound about the same. There's not really one that's drastically better sounding than another. I really think in this price range, you're just looking for build quality, and you're looking for something that's going to work every time you turn it on, and something that's going to last you, I think that's what's important at this price range. I think anybody walking into this price range knows that you're only getting limited features, at this price point. So the Xair delivers all that. It delivers it as well as just about anybody else. I mean, the effects are decent. They're not horrible. The delay is actually really cool. You know, never had any problem with the delay in it. The EQs and compressors seem to work about as good as the X32. I've never A-beat them next to each other, but I know when I'm kind of honking on them during sound check, they sort of are doing what I want them to do, which at this price point is saying something, you know. For years and years and years in the analog world, when you bought lower end mixers, the EQs is really where you took a big hit, that and the preamps. You know, the preamps would either be way super hot and mid-rangey, or they would be warm and very low. You know, you wouldn't get a lot of, you really had to crank them to get any volume out of them. But the EQs really took a beating. You know, that sometimes we used to joke on some of those old PV consoles that, you know, it says high, mid, and low, it's just there for looks. It's not really doing what it says it's doing. Like even when they added a mid sweep to some of those middle of the road consoles, you know, 1K did not necessarily sound like 1K. You know what I mean? So you get what you pay for, ladies and gentlemen. You know, I mean, you just do. Don't freak out on me because I'm giving you the truth here. It just is what it is. You get what you pay for. If you can afford to take a step up, would highly recommend you get into an X32 rack. Way more feature set, way better build. It's a time-tested and proven format that is reliable, and it's going to outlast and be way less frustrating than an X-Air any day of the week. It just is. But, and you know, look guys, you know, with the price decrease they just had, I just bought an X-Air for, it was $952 after tax, shipped to my front door from Sweetwater. So I mean, with that being said, I mean, what's an X-Air go for? Like $500-600 or something? I mean, it's not that much of a jump, you know, to get up there. And you'd just be way, way happier. But that's neither here nor there. Let me stop the camera, and I'm going to go back here to Mixing Station, and I'm going to take you through a start scene that I had created for a country band friend of mine, and we'll look at how I kind of set up and build a mix inside the X-Air. Okay, so here we are looking at Mixing Station. This is a country band start scene for a very good friend of mine, Melissa Quinn Fox. Please check her out. She is absolutely amazing. So we basically got drums, bass. There for a hot second, they were using a room mic for their ears. I don't think they're using that anymore. Melissa's acoustic, an electric guitar, another acoustic, vocal. So we have 4 vocals. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And then clicking tracks here at the end. So that's sort of the setup. This is a pretty, you know, average setup that you're going to have on an X-Air for any kind of band configured in this way. Let's just kind of go through here and take a look at how I have things, you know, set up. This is my kick EQ. I like to be around 50 hertz here. And then this is the attack. This is using a Beta 52 kick mic on a stand poking through the resonant head hole, vent hole. This gives me the nice tick that I like to get, which is kind of rock and roll. I don't overdo it with country because it's not really a country thing. Country's just more of a thug most of the time. I sweep out all this stuff in the middle, so there's no junk there. My gate is pretty liberal, so it's not really cutting off much of anything. It would have to be up to about here or here to like have a really tight gate. So it's really a pretty open gate on the kick. My sound systems usually have enough bottom end to where I don't need to get crazy with that. I do like to compress the kick a good bit. Attack is 31 milliseconds. We're at a 7-to-1 ratio, and my makeup gain is at 8 dB. So some of you may be looking at that like, wow, 7-to-1 is a lot. Well, I like to squish it a good bit. This looks like a lot, but this guy doesn't have a heavy foot. So his level is probably floating around here, instead of up here like it would be for a guy like me who has a heavy foot. So I'm really only compressing about 6 to 8 dB, which is what we're making up here, and it's just to fatten it up a little bit and give it a little bit of smack on the attack side. What else do we have there? I think that's basic. I think that's the basic fundamentals of that. You know, there's so many other things we could talk about doing to the kick, but the X-Air doesn't really give us a lot of toys to play with. And honestly, even when I'm on my M32 rig, I don't do a whole lot more than this. I make sure the gain is correct. You know, here's where my output fader is. You can see we're at like -5. I usually during sound check will set that at, you know, -5, even -10, and kind of get a good level with the input gain. I use a B52 so much on the kick that I just know where it needs to be, and all my start scenes already have it, you know, pretty much dialed in. And let me also mention that a lot of the gain structure that I would be using on the X32 or the M32 translates to the X-Air. So this is about the same gain structure that I would be using on my M32 rig. So there's something to be said for that, you know, so there's got to be some level of transparency between the two different mixers for that to be the case. If I had to guess, they may even have the exact same preamps as the X32. It kind of feels that way. My snare, this guy has a very typical brass 6 deep, 14 in diameter snare, and it's tuned loose, but not super loose, like a little bit under a mediocre tightness, what you would come to know and love about country music snare drums. It sounds like that. It's very classic. It's very traditional sounding. And really all I'm doing is just taking out some bottom end mud with this high pass filter. It's set at 86 Hertz. And then I just sweep out a whole bunch of goofy nonsense in the center. That thing had a little bit of a ring at around 850 or 900 Hertz. That's why you're seeing this here. On a lot of snares, I'll have this, or even like slice it really thin like this and give it 1K, because then when they do a rim shot across the snare, that will make that pop right up out of the mix without compromising the sound of the whole snare. But yeah, so there's a little trick for you. In this case, I just kind of had it this way because we were trying to get that little wonky ring out of the way. It was nice and bright on the high end, and it had a nice thug on the bottom end. So it actually sounded really good. Really, the only thing I needed out of it was just this compression. Now, I compress a snare pretty hard. Again, 7:1, 31 milliseconds, 7 dB of makeup gain on the output of the compressor there. And it's compressing 10 to 12 dB, you know, which gives it a nice smack, you know. And it's kind of a studio thing for you studio guys. I'm trying to think. I don't ever gate the snare. I'm trying to remember what mic we used on the snare. It might have been an SM57 with the way this gain looks. That, or it would have been a Sennheiser 604, one or the other. But yeah, so I mean that's kind of what, you know, what the snare looks like. You know, again, as I'm making all these adjustments, I'm letting my ears tell me, you know, what I wanted, you know, what I want, you know, from this, and I am manipulating all this to make my ears happy with what I'm getting. So here is a rack tom. This was a sweet spot on the low end. I rolled off everything underneath of it, pulled out a bunch of wonky stuff in the center, and then 3K will always give you the attack of the drum. Not doing much in the way of compression there, just a little bit. I might be trimming 2 or 4 dB there, and no makeup gain, just, you know, all the usual parameters with, I think I'm 32 milliseconds there, 7:1. I'm 7:1 compression on all my channels. Then if I have a subgroup like I do with vocals, I will have that at like 4:1, and then the left-right compression, left-right out, I'll have it at like 2.5:1. So as I get closer to the final output, I am trying to ease up on the compression so that I don't lose the dynamics of the music. That's a pretty conservative gate. for that drum. This is not a loud band. If that was a rock band, this might be up here a little bit more, but because they're a country band and they're pretty well behaved volume wise, that's about all I do with the gate on that. And the only thing, just, you know, for the sake of conversation, the only thing that I use gates on is rack and floor toms and kick. You know, that's really it. Here's the floor tom. Same principle. Find a sweet spot on the low end, boost it, roll off everything underneath of it, pull out the mid, and then give it some 3K for attack. I will compress the floor tom a little more aggressively than the rack tom, just because I like it to be a little fatter. You know, so I'm kind of approaching it almost as I do the kick drum. And this is actually, that was at 3-1, needs to be at 7-1. So yeah, and then an overhead. So an overhead looks like this. We're, you know, getting rid of all that bottom end. I think this was some wonky stuff. We were running through her system. I think she was using a Bose stick rig. And we were kind of EQing out some wonky stuff there from, you know, from the system itself, and then we just kind of boosted. This almost looks like a hi-hat channel. These guys didn't run a hat mic to make room for other stuff in the mix. Let's look at bass guitar. I don't usually do a whole lot with bass guitar besides compression. This guy has a variety of basses. He typically uses, I think it's like a Les Paul, Epiphone Les Paul, or maybe even a Gibson Les Paul bass. And I just felt like it needed a little more low-end presence. 100 hertz is typically where that's at with bass guitar. And then the tone is going to be around 1K, 800, you know, somewhere in that ballpark, maybe even down to, you know, 500. It depends on the bass, depends on the player. Bass guitar is one of those instruments, man, where it's really heavily dependent on, is it an active bass? Is it a passive bass? You know, what's in their pedal board? What is their playing style? Because tone happens in your fingers. You know, that dictates what I do to the EQ. But I typically, in a whole lot of the bass EQs with the bands I work with, there's almost nothing going on here. It's just flat, because what I'm getting from the bass is correct. And then the system has enough beef and enough muscle that we're able to make the low end stuff happen. This is just a left, right, out. Yeah, okay. I'm used to being on the M32 where we'd have the mono channel going, which we would use that for aux sub. And in which case, that's awesome on bass guitar, because here's how that trick works. If you're aux sub, first of all, you have to turn it on. What I do is turn this down and then listen to what the bass sounds like just coming out of the tops. And then once I get that where I want it, basically getting the tone of the bass right, then I'll start adding the aux sub until I'm fattening up the bottom end where I want it, and then wherever that is where it's going to live. And then I don't have to really do a whole lot in the EQ to make that viable. So yeah, but on the compression side, we do compress the bass fairly aggressively. I like to always be compressing about, you know, 4 to 6 dB. Again, 31 milliseconds, 7-1. We're not making up any gain here. We're just basically trying to calm down what's going on with the bass without robbing it of its dynamics. Because we always want the bass to get soft when he plays soft and to get loud when he plays loud. So that's the trick with compression. Moving on to, this is an acoustic channel. So this is Melissa's acoustic. Basically pretty flat on the low end. She has a rubber, I call it a hockey puck, a resonant hole cover on this instrument, so that we don't have to do a bunch of wonky stuff here to get, you know, feedback out of the way. That solves that problem. Her guitar is very warm and fat right out of the box. Now, she did just buy a new acoustic that I haven't had a chance to mix yet. And, you know, we'll see what that thing sounds like when we get it in the system. But I really felt like it needed some definition, you know, and it needed a little more life to the guitar. It just felt really mid-rangey and real low mid. You know, now, as always, we're trying to pull out a bunch of bottom end that we don't need. That's at like 88 hertz. So 3K is always a great frequency to go to when you want to pull definition out of something. But it's a two-edged sword. If you get too much of it, it can make a guitar sound tinny real quick and rob it of its tone. So be very conservative with it. This is actually a lot of a boost from what I would typically, do. Like if I was on my M or on an X32, this may have something to do with the EQs in the X Air. I haven't A-B'd them, so I really can't tell you exactly the difference there. This is what my ears told me was right. When I look at it, I feel like it should be more like this, but my ears were saying this, and my ears always win the argument. So yeah, so that's what's up with that. I don't really compress, acoustic guitar unless there's some kind of weird thing going on. This is really about, having it right at the source. Melissa plays great, awesome high-end acoustic guitars. All these guys do. This band is a pro touring band. These guys are the real deal. So they're using really, really good instruments. And when you have it at the source, you don't have to recreate it here. You know what I'm saying, guys? Like, you just need to make it louder, and correct for the room or correct for what system stuff is in the way of how the instrument is naturally. In a perfect world, everything that we do is just a matter of reinforcing what the artist is giving us and not putting a bunch of icing on the cake, but letting the program and the instruments speak for themselves. This is an EQ setting that's very stereotypical for that scenario. Her guitar sounds amazing as soon as you plug it in. So you don't need to fix a bunch of stuff. That's the difference between working for a professional and working for a novice or an amateur or a weekend warrior or a hobby, level kind of guy is, the better the instrument and the better you have these things going on at the source, then the easier it is to mix. As I said, no gate. I don't run any gates on that. Her gain structure is at like plus 20.5 dB. She was at -5 on the fader. You know what? That changes from guitar to guitar. It just does. Some acoustics, it's weird. It's like acoustics and keyboards are like that. One acoustic, and it could be both Martins. One acoustic may be, that kind of gain structure. The next acoustic may be, I'm over here at like 2 o'clock with the input gain and still have the fader in the same place, trying to get the level out of it. So it really just depends on the electronics that are in the instrument itself. This would be Mr. Jimmy Cherry's electric guitar. Again, as you can see, there's not a lot going on here. His tone is so good right out of the amp that, I don't need to do a whole bunch of stuff to it. I'm really just pulling some bottom end out of it for the sake of there's a live mic on his amp, in the room. And, if we want to push some volume, it keeps it from, getting any kind of low end feedback. And a country guy doesn't want a bunch of, wonky bottom end, especially at 200 hertz there, which is where we're at, goofing stuff out. But that's a really modest cut. The guy's just getting it right at the instrument. No compression, that's nothing. That's just whatever it is. I mean, where was his gain structure? Yeah, okay. I don't remember what mic we had on that. I think when I did this scene, I was on their system and on their mics. So I'm not 100% sure exactly what guitar mic we were using, but we were at 7.5, and then the fader is at like probably -7 or 8, or something like that. Jimmy's acoustic, same deal. You starting to see what's going on here? This is complete bull butter. That was probably something somebody else had done in her mixer. This wasn't my mixer. This was her mixer. I would never run that kind of compression on an acoustic. He has 48 hertz going on this, which probably means that he's using an active DI, like a Sans amp or like a Pro 48 radial or something like that on his acoustic, and that's super smart on his end because that makes everything way fat, and they're very transparent EQs mid-range wise. So now moving on to vocals, let's just look at Melissa's vocal instead of going through all these. So this is EQing that I was doing for the sole purpose of correcting her system. This has no reflection on her vocal tone because her vocal tone is amazing. It doesn't need any help, you know. This is just the things that I heard in the system. Again, my ears always win the argument, to where I felt like these things needed to be calmed down a little bit, settled down a little bit. We really rolled off a lot of bottom end here. We're at like 174 hertz on the bottom end of that. You know, I usually run between 135 and 150 on the high pass filter. And that seems crazy to a lot of you guys. And it will sound a little thin when you're doing sound check, but when the whole band gets going, you'll find that it'll chop right through the mix. You won't have to struggle as hard to get it up in the mix where you want it, especially if you have a light whisper singer. Melissa's not one of those people. She sings very deliberate into the mic, and she's the perfect singer to what you want to mix. You know, she gives you everything that you want in that vocal range. So this is just, it felt a little tinny on the top end. And 300 hertz is where some mud is, you know, so I just need to pull a little bit of that down, and that really got it done. We're up here back. I always do makeup gain at 4 dB on all vocals. 7 to 1, I'm at 33 millisecond attack. The hold is at 0. I usually have the hold on most of these. Let me get this right. I think it's at 10, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 10 is where I run it on the M's. And then the release usually, I think at 151. This was a scene that was originally hers that I kind of just got into at a gig and just tried to clean up without reinventing the wheel. So there's still some things here that aren't exactly textbook JR start scene stuff. But that is the compression setting that I typically use on all the X-Air, X32, M32 setup. Is the attack around 30, 35 milliseconds, the hold at 10 milliseconds, the release at 151. I think it says 156 because it's just fighting me a little bit with my big fingers. 7 to 1 compression. And then, you know, I just move this up and down where I want it, where my ears are telling me, you know, I'm getting the amount of compression that I want without robbing her of the ability to practice vocal dynamics. When she sings soft, it should get soft. When she sings loud, it should get louder. It will just get louder, slower, and I mean slower in terms of milliseconds slower than what it typically would without the compressor. But the compressor adds a lot of body to a vocal, and it's something you just have to develop a feel for. You know, I get guys that come to me all the time wanting to know, let's look at her gain structure while we're here too, that want to know how to, you know, understand compression. And I can give you all the technical stuff and it's not going to tell you what you want to hear. It's something you just have to develop a feel for. You know, I come from the world of analog originally, where, you know, the only lights that you could see here, you can open this up and you can see, you know, the signal going through here and how much it's, how much it's compressing and all that jazz. And, you know, in analog days, the only thing we could see was if you had a high-end compressor, you might get a signal light that just a little LED that turns green, telling you that there's a signal there. And then you would be able to see what it's compressing, you know, on the gain reduction meter. Here you get to see a lot of other things. You know, you can peak stop, you know, all that kind of stuff. You can see the signal underneath of where you're compressing. So coming from that analog world, like I was speaking about, you know, you had to develop a feel for that. You know, I mean, you relied heavily on that gain reduction meter and then just what your ears told you, you know, and it's just something you got to develop. It just really is. I forget what mic. I think she was using maybe a Beta 58 or something, or That seems awfully hot to be that. It might have been a SC Electronics V7 for all I know. I mixed so many shows, it's hard for me to remember. This scene, when I saved this to the iPad, it's probably been 6 months ago. And I've probably done, I don't know, 80 shows since then. So it's hard for me to remember exactly what mic she's using. I think she has 2 different mics. I thought a Beta 58 was one of them, but she might use an 87A too. I don't know. This is definitely not an 87A gain structure. Plus the 48 volts is not on, so it doesn't have phantom power going to it. I would guess a V7. That looks like a V7 gain structure. You're at about -5 on the fader and 31.5 dB on the input gain. So that kind of points everything toward a V7. The only thing else really to go through here is the tracks. If the tracks are right, you don't need to do anything to it. It's like keyboards. This is what my keyboard EQs look like too. Sometimes if I have a guy who's left hand heavy on a keyboard, I'll do something like this just to clean up the bottom end because it's getting in the way of the bass guitar and the kick. But other than that, that stuff really should be good right out of the box. If you see my EQ all jacked up with tracks, it's because whoever recorded the tracks didn't know what the hell they were doing. So let's go to final output and talk about that for a second. She had been using this parametric on final out. I would not do that. And the reason I say that, this is a good quick way to kind of just get your EQ where you want it, but I would insert a 31 band EQ, and it won't let me do it because we're not connected to the device. I would, connect a 31 band EQ and have it here. Like this is a 31 band. On this scene, it's not assigned to anything, but because this is my mastering, customized CLP audio mastering section, I have a front of house EQ quick button there so I can look at the front of house EQ. That's where I would change EQing at front of house because you can really carve it out a lot better that way. The other thing is compression. She's at 3-to-1. That's not bad. 34 on the thing. I would change the hold to, like I said, 10, and then this down to 151 or in that ballpark. And then I would just play with it, When I'm running in at the last minute and walking in on somebody else's rig like I was in this scenario, I really am just looking at the attack, the ratio, and the makeup gain. Because all my start scenes already have the hold and release set up that way. But I didn't have enough time the night that we did this show to really dig deep into this scene and get every teeny tiny little thing exactly where I want it. But we got it to where we needed it for the night and got through the show just fine. So your EQing front of house is really just EQing for the room or for whatever deficiencies may be going on with the system itself. It's not to correct for anything. Like if you got a mic that's trying to feed back, you need to go to that mic channel and find that feedback here and turn it down. Don't do it on the house EQ, because if you turn down, say 1K on the house EQ, now you just turn 1K down on the entire band. You always find that feedback at the channels. The first thing is to figure out where it's at, which channels it's coming from. And the way you do that is you ask yourself a series of simple questions. What do I have microphones on? Well, in this scenario, you got a mic on the kick, snare, rack, floor. You have an overhead mic. The bass is direct. The acoustic guitars are direct. You have a mic on the electric guitar, and then you have 4 vocal mics. So your feedback, it can only happen on one of those microphones. Typically, it's going to happen in a vocal mic most of the time because that's where you're pushing the most gain. But if you got somebody who's like super light on the snare and you're really trying to get the snare in the mix, I've seen a lot of 350 feedbacks happen on snare drum, But feedback typically doesn't happen in the drums because the drums are usually pretty loud, and you really don't need to push a whole bunch of drums in the house rig when you're playing clubs under 200 or 300 people or whatever. And that's where this was a venue where, if I'm not mistaken, I think this venue was, you know, even smaller than that. It might have been a little intimate show that she did during the week over in Frederick, Maryland. And yeah, I think that room was like 75 people max, you know, so that, in that case, a lot of this stuff, like, you notice there's no snare in the mix. Well, that's probably why. There's no overhead in the mix. Well, that's probably why. The overhead and the snare are there so that it goes to their ears, because these guys are all ear monitors. You know, so that's kind of the point with that. So let me turn the camera back around and we'll chat a couple more minutes and then I'll let you go. Okay, and welcome back. So let me just wrap up by saying I actually posted a video a couple days ago. It's kind of a bonus video on the channel, and you know, was talking about mixing from the stage and keeping things simple and that sort of thing. Look, most of you guys that are using an X-Air, you're probably, I mean, I think the predominant amount of you are playing small to mid-sized rooms. So all those parameters in that video we posted on Monday apply to this scenario as well. So I would encourage you to go back and watch that video. I think it's only like 15 minutes long or something. But yeah, keep it simple, man. Don't mix yourself into a corner. You know, don't put more stuff in front of house that doesn't need to be in front of house. If you got a loud drummer, I'd put a little bit of kick and maybe some floor tom, and that's all I'd throw in front of house. You know, if you got a loud guitar player, electric guitar player on stage, take him out of front of house. You know, he's loud enough on stage to cover the room, you know. Mix smarter, not harder, you know. Don't put yourself in a scenario where you feel like you have to have everything in front of house to have some kind of control over it. Because I can tell you from experience that if you do that and you got a loud drummer or a loud guitar player or both, and they're like competing against each other to see who can be loudest, you're gonna have to drive the sound system so hard to get up over that. Now you got like 110 dB front of house mix and you're running people out of the place. And now the bar owner doesn't like you and the band can't figure out why the crowd's not there, even though the band's responsible for their stage volume. I know there's a whole conversation to be had about that. But when you're working with these little mixers, man, less is more. You notice we didn't go through a whole bunch of effects in that. That's because all I run, this is country, dude. This ain't like 80s hair metal where I need a bunch of digital delay, you know, or multi-tap delay. I put a little bit of verb on the vocals, and that's it. I don't even put any verb on the drums. You know, I'm trying to keep it simple, man, because that's what works in the room. Most of these middle to, you know, the small rooms have enough natural reverb in the room because it's all hard surfaces around you that you really don't need any verb hardly at all. I mean, I was listening to Dave Nattell from, you know, the Rolling Stones talking about how he rarely runs reverb on his on his system with the Rolling Stones, because they're playing these big, huge arenas and stadiums that are all indoors, and they have, you know, 400 milliseconds of natural delay and verb going on in the room. Why do you need to run verb? You think about that stuff. And the thing that I see guys really screwing up on is they get online and they listen to these fidgeter kind of engineers, and it's all over YouTube, man. It really is. And I sat and I watched these guys' videos, and I'm like, you know, what they're saying isn't necessarily wrong, but it's way, way overcomplicated. And it doesn't need to be that way. It doesn't need to be that complicated for the middle market, okay? If you're on tour with the Foo Fighters or Pink Floyd or, you know, whatever, fill in the blank, dude, you know, whatever national touring act at Keith Urban, you know, something like that. Okay, well, then we're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. We're going to have a Waves rack. We're going to have all the goodies, okay? You're not that guy, okay? You're not that tour. You're playing at O'Malley's down on the corner, okay? Let's just keep it real, all right? So if you want to be the best sounding band at O'Malley's, less is more. Listen to what I'm telling you. And all these other guys who spent all week watching these expert sound engineers on YouTube and TikTok, and, you know, they buy books and they pay for these long series of, I remember they used to come out on DVDs. Now I guess it's all digitally downloaded when you purchase it, but just this whole multi-video series where they're going to teach you how to mix and teach you how to build a mix. All that stuff they're teaching you is completely relative to the room that you're in, to the band that you're mixing. Those are not concrete techniques. Some of the fundamentals can be, and that's why we're a channel that harps on fundamentals and harps on, keeping it simple, harps on getting it right at the source. Have good guitar tone at the amp before I ever put a mic in front of it. Then I don't have to fight it out front. Tune your drums correctly so that all I have to do is put a mic on it and make it louder, fill it out in the room. Don't make me have to manufacture you at the console, because that makes my life miserable. I probably am never going to want to work with you again, because if I ain't having fun, I don't want to work with you. Okay, that's just, I'm in a place in my life and in a place in my career where I can do that. I don't have to work for anybody I don't want to work for, and I don't want to work for guys like that. If you go back a few weeks, I did a video called Manufacturing Bands or something like that. Go back and watch that video and you'll hear my frustration and you'll hear what I'm talking about, because it's not a matter of auto-tuning everybody. It's a matter of hiding the weaknesses, and pushing forward the strengths, which we do in everything we do. But the better the band, the better the mix. The better the system, the better the mix. Instead of, I can speak the English language here, instead of spending your money on these how-to series of videos that cost you $300 or $400, dump that $300 or $400 into buying really nice subs and really nice, front of house speakers and monitors and in-ear monitors and correct cabling. I can't tell you how many guys on the X-Air level of mixers that are out here using those colorful eBay cables that you can get for, I don't even know what it is anymore. It used to be you could get like 10 of them for, $3 or something like that or whatever. Now I think you can get 25 of them for $10 or whatever. They're junk, dude. And if your cabling's not right, it doesn't matter how good of an engineer you are. If you're not passing signal and signal flow is interrupted, your mix is going to go into trash, dude. It's dog water. It's not going to happen, man. So it's about getting all those things correct. That stuff is as important as your ability to mix. Now look, you hear me on this channel all the time say, it's always the Indian and not the arrow. But the arrow has to be straight. The arrow has to have a tip on it. Otherwise, it doesn't execute what you're trying to accomplish with it. So make sure that all the different things in your system, use good microphones, mic cables, name brand, quality gear. QSC K-Series stuff is really good. I love the KS181 subs for a single 18. That's a great sub. And the K2 or K12 tops, they're not bad. They're great. It's a 12 and a horn. You put that over a set of those KS118s, you got a nice little rig. Just make sure you're connecting it with decent XLR cables. Pig Hog brand or Whirlwind or Mugambi, or, if you don't want to spend the Whirlwind and Mugambi money, I get it. Just buy a cable like Proco or something like that, somebody that has Nutrix ends on it, something that is quality, that's not going to give up on you, 6 months into owning the things. Yeah, I got cables in my mic XLR box that, dear God, some of them cables are 15, 20 years old. And they still work fine. I use them every week. And you know what? We had one cable go bad this past week on a gig. It's the first cable that I have had fail in, I don't even know, 10 years? Something like that. And you know what we did with it? We threw it away. We didn't throw it back in the box. That drives me nuts to see guys do that. Why do you throw a bad cable back in the box with all the good cables? If you know that it's a problem cable, throw it away. Because it's making you look like dog water to the band and the venue and the audience. And come on, dude. The simple stuff is always going to get you where you want to be. Doing the fundamentals correctly. And there's so many of you guys with these X-Airs that aren't getting all that other stuff right. It doesn't matter if you have a Pro 2 sitting there. If the cables that you're using to hook the system up with is trash, then you're going to have nothing but problems. I used to freelance for a guy that had a system like that. He paid me really good money to come freelance on his rig. And I did about 3 or 4 shows with him and then quit answering the phone because he had horrible, horrible cables. And it was constantly cutting in and out, and then it makes me look bad. Everyone sitting there doesn't know that, hey, it's not JR's fault. It's the owner of the system who is too cheap to buy decent cables after I've told him multiple times to go buy cables, send him links to the correct cables to buy, and he doesn't want to spend the money. Okay, they all look at me like I'm doing something wrong. Well, look, man, that ain't gonna fly in my world. I got way too strong of a reputation for all that stuff to be happening in my world. You know, I need to make sure that everything is where it is. That way, the mix that has my name on it is transparent, and if I'm doing my job right, most people don't even know that I'm even in the room. You know, this is an art form that we get to exercise and no one should ever see if you're doing it right. The crowd isn't coming there to see me. They're coming to see the band. I mean, check your ego at the door, dude. You're really not that cool, okay? You're another sound engineer. I could swing a dead cat and hit 3 of them in my neighborhood right now. Now, good sound engineers and bad sound engineers, you know, the numbers are radically different there. But at the same time, if you can't get the fundamentals right, I don't care what kind of voodoo magic you think you can wave over your mixer, it's going to fall on deaf ears because you don't have signal flow integrity. Look, I love you guys. As always, I'll see you next week.